Arthur, have arrived here today to preside over the meeting of the grey aliens and the fae folk. I will hear your arguments now. Please begin.
Yeah, you know what? King Arthur, your holiness. Look, we've been haunting these lands for millennia. All right? We've been taking babies out of their cribs, turning people to stone. We've been stealing their cabbages and their sausages. And now all of a sudden, these wise guys show up in their spacecraft and they want to take our jobs. I mean, where's the justice in that?
Time has left you in the past. It is our time now to reign over the land. You will cease and desist immediately.
I can't believe you sided with me, son.
Order! I will have order here today. Grey aliens, tell me more. What are your plans with the land?
King Arthur, we need the land to test our probing equipment, which is vital to our mission.
And your mission is?
Probing and cataloging every human we find.
Yeah, how come you guys want to shove something inside everybody you meet, huh? What's with that? Are you perverts?
I can't believe
you
these
scumbags.
Order here. Human bureaucrat, what do you have to say?
Yeah, you guys can do whatever you want. If anybody says anything, we'll just say they're crazy.
Oh, you're not gonna burn them at the stake like they used to do back in our day? Come on! When people used to talk of witches, they ended up on a funeral pyre. So backward and barbaric. We use them in the name of science. Yeah, science, schmience. Why don't you baldies get out of here? I'm gonna kick your ass, you
Order! I have come to a decision. Be it by royal decree, the land shall be divided equally between the grey and the fae folk, and let the border run right through the Falkirk Triangle. Are all in agreement?
All right, we agree, but as long as they remain in their territory.
Yeah, what the heck? Okay, that's fine with us. As long as they keep their probes away from us, you hear?
All right, then it is agreed. But before we make it law, let us first run the idea by the reptilians. Hillary Clinton, what do you have to say?
You could put their supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
I know why you wanna.
Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
And you have arrived in the mists of Avalon, the mists of the moors of Scotland, where the fairies reign, and the pixie dust, it's like dandruff, it's all over the place, where aliens supposedly live, maybe in the sky, but more likely beneath your very feet. And where are you standing? Doesn't matter where you go in this world, you're always standing front and center on Creep Street, folks. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Creep Street Podcast, Twitter at Creep Street Pod, TikTok at Creep Street Podcast. Of course, we also have a Facebook group called Citizens of the Milky Way, a Creep Street fan page. Anyone can join that. And people like to post articles in there, share stories and whatnot. You can put that in there. Anyone can join. Just click the Let Me In button. One of us will let you in. And also another shout out, a call out to everyone. We are currently accepting listener stories. We want to do one here pretty soon. So we actually have some left over, I think. And so we already have some. So we're just waiting for a few more and we can compile them, do a listener stories episode. It's been a while since we've done that. And of course, if once a week is not enough for you, well, you just head on over to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast to get some extra goodies. We got bonus episodes. Got movie watch-alongs. You get to listen to the sketches early. We've got Patreon exclusive sketches, all that fun stuff, so go check that out. Now, oh, baby. Let's get a little bagpipe music in there, just faintly. Let's get a little in there. Oh, yeah, that's it. I hear it. I can hear it. Folks, we are taking a trip today to a mythical land. I mean, this is kind of back to back. We did Ireland. Now we're in Scotland. I mean, we are just in, I don't know. This is basically a Hallmark movie. I mean, we are in the gorgeous lands of central Scotland here. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Falkirk Triangle, King Arthur, and aliens. Yes. I know what that. I know you're thinking, there's no way. I know you're thinking that's just too weird. Well, buckle up, suckers, because it's getting weird today. Hold on tight, kiss your mama, tell her you love her, because you are going on a wild ride. And first, let me put my source sauce all over your face here. First, we got the Falkirk UFO Triangle Global Hotspot at Tour HQ, and UFOs and High Strangeness at Scotland's Falkirk Triangle by Brent Swanser at Mysterious Universe. Now, folks, in the heart of central Scotland, the skies, while misty, cloudy, are rarely ever calm. Even on the calmest nights, when the winds are quiet and the fields lay still, at least the locals say there's a peculiar hum that seems to linger overhead. And no, it's not just the blinking of commercial flights coming in to Edinburgh or Glasgow. This is something else. It doesn't follow flight paths. It's something that perhaps, as some locals believe, is even watching. If you know where to look, you'll find no shortage of strange activity in this stretch of land. It's a region that's earned itself a nickname with equal parts awe and unease: the Falkirk Triangle. It borders roughly by Stirling, Falkirk, and the southern edge of Edinburgh. The swath of Scottish countryside has become ground zero for some of the most sustained, consistent, and bizarre UFO activity ever recorded. Modern encounters in Scotland really begin in earnest with a case that to this day baffles both investigators and skeptics alike. It happened in 1979, deep within the Decmont Woods near Livingston. Here, a forestry worker named Robert Taylor, a man with no history of flights of fancy, well, he was going about his usual rounds when he spotted something that seemed impossible. A metallic object floating above the ground, its surface rippling like heat on the pavement. You know, when you're driving down the road on a hot day and you can see those squiggly lines coming off the ground. That wasn't it. Moments later, he was on the ground, dazed and injured, with torn clothing and marks on his legs. Something had grabbed him. Something that wasn't supposed to be real, at least he thought. Well, the police logged it not as delusion or misadventure, but as an actual criminal assault by an unknown entity. The only UFO incident, in fact, in the UK ever to be treated as a police matter. But Decmont was just the beginning. In the years that followed, reports began pouring in. Encounters with glowing orbs, craft that moved in ways no human machine should, beings glimpsed on the edge of perception. All of it concentrated within this peculiar triangle of Scottish land. Some say it's ley lines. Others claim it's something buried deep beneath the soil. And some, with voices hushed and eyes wide, insist that it's something watching from above. And whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: the skies over Falkirk are not empty. It was 1989, and the mossland at Grandham, just outside Bonnybridge, was on fire. A fire crew had been dispatched near the scene at Shield Hill, Scotland. Standard protocol was nothing unusual, just another blaze out in the boggy wilds. But as they arrived, their hoses uncoiled, their boots sinking into the soot-blackened mud, something appeared on the horizon. Something these firefighters were not trained for. A red object glowing. Not like a flame or like a flare, but hovering. At first, it seemed to want to keep its distance. It was just looming just far enough to be dismissed as maybe a trick of the light. But then, it did start to move, straight towards them. It drifted closer, and it was absolutely silent as it moved, and it was pulsing with an unnatural hue of light, until it was almost bearing down on the fire engine itself. Then, just as quickly as it had approached, it veered off and disappeared into the haze. But that wasn't the end of this showdown. Then, a second object appeared, this one white. Cold and clinical, it hovered directly above Loch Elric, no more than 8 meters above the stunned fire crew. And it was just hanging there, as if watching and waiting. And then, without warning, it rushed towards them with terrifying speed, only to peel away at the last possible moment, as if to say, if I wanted to touch you, I could have, but I didn't. It was like this thing was almost playing chicken in a weird way. And just when the men thought their eyes were playing tricks on them, a third object cut across the sky overhead. 3 unknowns, no sound. They made absolutely no sound, with no explanation for what they were. These were not campers. These firefighters weren't cranks, of course. They were professional firefighters and people who are literally trained to keep cool in moments of chaos, right? I mean, yeah, maybe they're not trained for UFO encounters, but they're trained to keep a cool head, right? It's like police or anything else, or a soldier, you know what I mean? Or even like a nurse or a doctor, someone who's inserted, someone who you're supposed to have like a cool, calm demeanor. And when something happens, you just keep your calm and you work through it.
They really should work in the UFO training as well. Here's exactly how you definitely don't want to touch it, and you won't be able to.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's these things starting the fires. Maybe we got an arsonist on our hands.
Oh my goodness, that would make a lot of sense. Alien bastards.
Alien bastards, alien scum. Because you would think the bog is like a wet area. You know what I mean? I don't know anything about fire in that way. I mean, maybe it's just as flammable as anything else, but you would think that sounds like it's wet area, like things wouldn't burn well. But I could be naive, of course. What these firefighters saw that night was no weather balloon or drone, and it damn sure wasn't a hallucination. Something had come out of the fire that night, and it wasn't there to help put it out. Let's make that perfectly clear. It wasn't like the helicopters that fly over and dump the water and leave. No. These things were horsing around out there in the flames. Well, at the northern edge of the Falkirk Triangle, 4 miles west of Falkirk itself, there lies a modest town with a name known far beyond the borders of Scotland, and that's Bonnybridge, a town that by all accounts should have lived quietly, but instead, it became, some would argue, the UFO capital of the world, or at least Europe. Between 1992 and 1994, Bonnybridge residents reported over 600 sightings. Lights in the sky, shapes that moved like no other aircraft ever built. They hovered soundlessly over homes, over fields and roads before, of course, vanishing in a blink. And these were not isolated tales. This was like a wave. This is what they call a UFO flap. By 1997, the sightings had not slowed down. If anything, they had intensified. And in the midst of it all stood one man trying to make sense of this chaos. Councillor William Buchanan of the Falkirk District Council. What he did was something many wouldn't dare. He went public. Buchanan wrote multiple letters to high-ranking officials, including Prime Ministers John Major and Tony Blair. His message was clear. Something was happening in the skies over Bonnybridge, and the people deserved answers. In October of 1997, he told Blair directly, quote, "I've tried to get an answer for the people, and I've been ridiculed for it." Well, he was met with a boilerplate response from the Ministry of Defense, the kind that is almost worse than silence itself. They wrote, "We are satisfied that there's no evidence that the United Kingdom's airspace might have been compromised by hostile or unauthorized foreign military activity." And, quote, "The department has only limited interest in UFOs. In other words, don't worry about it.
Just seems like a very scripted, sweep it under the rug kind of response.
Oh yeah, very copy and paste. But Bonnybridge, well, they did worry. Because whatever was in the skies wasn't going away. And here's the part that will gnaw at you. For all of the mockery and for all of the deflection from government suits, some of these cases, well, let's just say they deserve a second look. Not all of them can just be chalked up to misidentified planes or atmospheric quirks. Some of them even feel like threats. And others even feel like invitations. Well, it was the evening of November 12th, 1991, and the air above central Scotland was brittle with cold, as well as uneasiness that had come over the area. The folks that lived there, this thing had been going on for a while, and they're on edge. 2 photographers were out near Polmont Reservoir, aiming their lenses towards the looming BP Chemicals plant at Grangemouth, and all industrial blaze and distant warning lights. But what they caught on camera that night wasn't just architecture. Hovering near the Kincardine Bridge, close to what locals call the, quote, flashing pylons, were 2 small, dimly flashing lights. At first, it looked like nothing more than a helicopter. It moved slow, almost cautious-like, drifting from across the sky from the bridge to Grangemouth Stadium, which was lit up like a beacon. And then it stopped, and it just hung there in the sky above the stadium. For 5 minutes, the craft remained motionless, perfectly still above the stadium. It didn't sway or shift around, and probably strangest of all, absolutely zero sound. A helicopter, especially that low, would be rattling the teeth in your head. But this thing was dead silent. And then without warning, it dipped sharply and accelerated, not away, but towards the stadium. The object was moving with calculated speed. It dropped to just about 200 to 300 feet directly above where the men stood. And as it passed overhead, it let out the softest, most unnatural sound, a low, mechanical, pulsing hum. In a weird way, it almost seemed like it was talking to them. It didn't just seem purely mechanical. The men were frozen, of course, not even exactly from fear, but just from the kind of cell-deep awe you can only feel when the sky seems to reach down and acknowledge you personally. And then, of course, just as quickly as it had arrived, the object rose again, fading into the night as if it had been satisfied with their little chat, and it was going to go home for the night. Maybe it was curious, who knows? But it didn't want to hurt them, but it did want to have a gander at them. Well, in 1992, a man was driving along the quiet roads near Bonnybridge, a village no different from 100 others that are scattered across central Scotland. But then, just above the treetops, he saw something. Something almost indescribable. A star-shaped object gliding low over the landscape like it had stepped down from the heavens. That single sighting seemed to crack the sky wide open, because after that night, Bonnybridge would be changed forever. What had once been a sleepy little dot on the map quickly became something else entirely. The, quote, UFO capital of Scotland, they called it, and soon after, even the UFO capital of the world. Big claims, of course, but the numbers seem to back that claim up. 300 sightings a year, and that is no myth or exaggeration, that is just plain data. People were seeing things again and again and again. They were seeing lights, shapes, beams of light, orbs of light, strange silent triangles that just float above the rooftops. No sound, of course, as always, maybe the creepiest part of it. Absolutely no sound. Bright flashes that would fade into the dark, encounters that left your skin tingling, and the clocks suddenly wrong. And this wasn't just locals fueling the rumor mill, this was pilots, police officers, teachers, counselors, children, tourists, fire crews, as we know. Something was happening in the skies over Bonnybridge. And no one could quite explain what. But everyone did agree on one thing. Something in the sky was watching them. Well, let's keep pushing forward to the 27th of August, 1992. Two men, one named Gary Wood, the other Colin Wright, were driving down the A70, a quiet, winding stretch of road that cuts through West Lothian, heading south through the belly of the Falkirk Triangle. Their destination was routine, but this night, baby, this night was going to be anything but routine. Near Harperig Reservoir, a remote, wind-lashed patch of countryside where the hills stretch wide, was where their encounter began to happen. It was something that would literally shatter their lives forever. The men describing being abducted. A craft, cold and vast, unlike anything built by human hands, descended over the road. Not a light in the sky or a passing blur, but a presence large enough to literally block out the stars and close enough to swallow them whole. And then, nothing. Silence. And a blank space in their memory. Somehow time had folded. Minutes, or maybe hours, had inexplicably slipped away. When they came back to themselves, they were no longer in their car. They were somewhere else, on board a strange craft. Now, this craft sounds huge. It reminds me of the crafts in Independence Day, how they're literally like citywide. You remember how that always I thought was so creepy and intimidating, this just behemoth Leviathan coming out of the clouds covering the city. And that's kind of what they're describing here. They would later describe being subjected to intrusive examinations. Technologies they couldn't even comprehend, truly alien in every sense of the word. They were restrained, examined, recorded, and then it got worse. Because this abduction didn't just end there. They say they were taken underground. Gary and Colin found themselves in what could only be described as a cavernous system beneath the earth. The walls lined with glass jars, and inside each jar were people, frozen and naked. Colin remembers pleading, begging with his captors not to be sealed away like the others, anything but become another specimen, another lost soul in a wall of forgotten people. Think about I almost think like the when Neo awakes in the Matrix, kind of. Like just those almost like that, just like rows and rows of just like people, of like human people in these jars.
Like some sort of sick catalog.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Almost like a catalog. Like it's a catalog of all their subjects that they've either examined or planning to or whatever, But the worst part, folks, is that it didn't end that night, because the memory kept coming back in flashes and in dreams. That sense that something was still watching them and still capable of reaching into their lives, taking more and more as it pleased. And somewhere, something was out there beneath those moors, beyond the reach of headlights. And what also might still be out there is that buried gallery of the damned, jars full of missing people, frozen in limbo forever. Ooh, that is creepy. That's like the idea of no one ever knowing, and you're just kind of this even if you're not conscious, you're just kind of like a specimen, you know what I mean? It's, man.
Terrible fate to have happen. I mean, it's really horrifying.
A nightmare to even think about. By September of 96, the skies above Scotland became restless again. This time, the story comes from Newton of Falkland, a quiet little patch in Fife just northeast of the Triangle. A place where the days are long and the air is clean and nothing much ever happens. Well, at least until September of '96, folks. A military family, the Air Force specifically, one grounded in logic and discipline, began to tell a story that was like something out of the Twilight Zone. Something vast and that feels eerily orchestrated. They described standing at the edge of a field, staring out at what were swarms of these small, ant-like figures creeping and crawling through the landscape. And there were dozens of them, maybe more. They described them as grays, like we think of as the classic gray alien. The spindly limbs, the eyes that are like the black ovals in their head. But these beings weren't just running around willy-nilly. No, they were working. They were harvesting hay and mixing it with what appeared to be their saliva. They were building something. Structures almost like a nest, like they were building a colony right there in the field. And above them hovered a ship. A black triangle the size of a stadium hanging silently in the sky. And then came the light. Bizarre geometric shafts of illumination, flickering and warping like some kind of a prism. And through these shapes of light, quietly descending, were tall, white figures, larger than the grays. They were silent, but had a commanding aura about them, the witnesses recall. And they did not walk down or descend a ladder. They teleported, phasing in and out of sight. These were clearly the ones in charge. And in that moment, the family, being military-minded, of course, realized they weren't just witnessing a chance encounter, they were witnessing a staging, a deployment, an operation in progress. This event is now regarded by many as one of the most shocking alien landings ever recorded. And it didn't happen in the deserts of Nevada or the outback of Australia. It happened in the fields of Fife, right in the heart of Scotland. And just like that, the question changed from, are we alone, to, what are they building? That to me is such a creepy tale, because it gives them this like bug-like, it kind of removes almost some of the intelligence and it makes them more just like creatures in a way, you know what I mean? Like the ones that are working. Because some people have theorized that grays are actually more like biological drones, that they're kind of like created to be like how we would send a rover to Mars. We're not there, but the rover's there. And this thing is part biological. It seems like it's, even though it's obviously not human, it seems like it's, it's like a being, like an intelligent being, when it may just be a drone of some kind that's able to pick things up with opposable thumbs, things like that, actually do tasks and whatnot.
That makes sense. It's also interesting to think that maybe they're not that, maybe they are biological, but they have like a hive mind in a way.
Yes.
You know, like wasps or something like that. And conceivably, they don't really have a lot of empathy, for lack of a better word, I suppose. They are just kind of entirely hive-minded.
Exactly.
Which is terrifying.
That almost makes it more terrifying. Like it's, when you think about the xenomorph from the Alien franchise, part of what, typically I think when we think of alien, we did a lot of science fiction and stuff, the aliens are usually smarter than us, or they're more powerful than us, when really the aliens that are in the Alien franchise are just like beasts. They're just like killing machines. They aren't smarter necessarily. They're smart hunters. They're clever hunters, but they're not like, creatures of reason necessarily. That's what almost makes them even scarier, is it's like being locked in with a rabid animal, except, a million times worse.
They're just kind of mindless.
Yes. And just horrifying. And the things they do to your body is just horrifying. By 1999, the strange happenings in Scotland were no longer confined to just Bonnybridge or the moors of Fife. Just 15 miles south of Edinburgh, in the former mining town of Gorebridge, something dark seemed to be unfolding. Longtime researchers and witnesses Jackie Gillis and Hennessy began to speak publicly about what they described as not just isolated sightings, but as an ongoing siege. According to them, Gorebridge wasn't just a UFO hotspot, it was being watched, studied, and possibly even inhabited. Their claim was not idle speculation either, as it came backed with miles of footage, multiple eyewitness accounts, and even coverage in local media. Hennessy was quoted on the Stargate Edinburgh Tours website saying, "Is there some ancient connection between history and mythology? Between land use of the Falkirk Triangle to the alien-looking events that are unfolding before our very eyes here today, on the ground, under it, and in the skies? Is there some kind of timeless pageant or battle being waged between beings of light and beings of darkness within this same mysterious Falkirk Triangle?" Well, what they captured on film was indeed strange, and it was persistent and unmistakably deliberate. Lights weaving through the sky, objects hovering at a low altitude, unexplained sounds reverberating in the night. Phenomenon that went beyond just simple coincidence. And it couldn't be explained away as just construction or test flights. For a brief moment, it looked like the story might even break through the veil into the mainstream. The evidence was there. The witnesses were talking, baby. Even the local member of parliament was made aware. But when the pressure mounted, the powers that be pulled back. The MP distanced themselves from the topic entirely, avoiding involvement in what was likely seen as a powder keg of potential hysteria. And just like that, Gorebridge was left to fend for itself under a silent siege. The cameras kept rolling, and the witnesses kept watching, but the answers would never come. In fact, the Ministry of Defense officially closed their file on the strangeness happening at the Falkirk Triangle in 2009. The defense minister was quoted saying, "The Ministry of Defense should seek to reduce very significantly the UFO task, which is consuming increasing resource, but produces no valuable defense output. In more than 50 years, no UFO sighting reported to the Ministry of Defense has ever revealed anything to suggest an extraterrestrial presence or military threat to the UK, and there's no defense benefit in the Military of Defense recording, collating, analyzing, or investigating UFO sightings. Investigations into UFO sightings, even from more reliable sources, serve no useful purpose and merely divert air defense specialists from their primary tasks. Accordingly, no further investigations should be carried out into UFO reports received from any source." Well. Well, what continued to unfold in Gorebridge through the late 90s and into the 2000s defied not just explanation, but even expectation. Some of the most compelling images were more than just vague lights or hazy shapes. They were striking and specific and unnervingly cinematic. Among them is footage of a dome-shaped craft lifting off from the fields, rising slowly into the air without sound. Other images showed sleek, highly engineered vehicles, the kind you'd expect to see in some B-movie, sci-fi flick from like the 60s or the 50s. And it was happening above the rooftops and the roads and the locals. And trailing not far behind in the skies nearby were often black helicopters, shadowy and silent, as if someone or something was watching the watchers. Notice that these helicopters are described as silent, as if to suggest these craft, these helicopters, they might have even been pretending to be Earth-made helicopters. Or perhaps some kind of secretive military helicopter specifically meant for following these strange craft. Because think about it. If you don't want people to see these things, then you don't want to be following them in a noisy-ass helicopter that will draw people's attention. Yet there's still these silent helicopters that are usually following these strange craft. And then came the orbs. And they were never flying solo either. These came in packs of 2 or 3 glowing aerial objects, unmanned, eerily fluid in their motion, and they were seen lifting up from the countryside below and even buzzing a commercial 737 on its descent into Edinburgh Airport. The orbs moved close, dangerously close,
Locals reported it. So did pilots. Air traffic control was made aware, but somewhere along the chain, the message conveniently vanished. The Ministry of Defense never received it, or at least they claimed that they didn't. Another thread lost in the fog. Well, more than once, there were daylight encounters. Strange glowing devices that were photographed weaving through the air above the houses and over the fields. One of the most disturbing captures is an image that seems to be of an alien figure standing atop the roof of a local home. No disguise, not even trying to be discreet about it, just standing there as if he was a local of the town. And beneath the earth, the mystery only deepened. Footage collected by Jackie Gillis showed large, slow, almost angelic-like beings. Many believe that these strange vessels were connected to the old coal mining shafts that were spiderwebbing beneath Gorebridge. And if that's true, then perhaps the aliens weren't just here to watch from above. Perhaps they have been down there all along. And Gage, as we know, this is something that's popped up a lot, is cave systems. And this is also becoming a more popular theory, is that, you know, a lot of these things that have been captured recently that like made the New York Times and stuff, these orbs that, or these craft that the Air Force and Navy pilots have picked up, a lot of times they'll dip into the water. They'll go underwater, they'll shoot up out of the water, meaning they aren't just meant for air. They're like an all-terrain kind of thing. People have claimed to see them coming out of mountains. Our episode, High Strangeness on Mount Shasta, was part of that. These things that seem to come out of the mountain, as if they lived beneath the mountain and then would go about for a joyride. By the early 2000s, the strange activity that had long haunted the skies of Bonnybridge and Gorebridge, they seemed to migrate towards the ancient stronghold of Stirling, at the top edge of what has now become widely known, of course, as the Falkirk Triangle. Reports in this region began to intensify, not just in frequency, but in clarity. And soon, Stirling had become the latest hotspot in its own right, capturing the attention of both believers and skeptics alike. One name in particular rose to prominence here, and that was Brian McPhee, prolific cameraman who, over the past 2 decades, has captured some of the clearest and most compelling UFO evidence ever documented in Scotland. In 2008, McPhee recorded footage of a black military helicopter circling what appeared to be a downed alien craft. A strange, metallic, otherworldly device resting in a field there in Stirling. It didn't look like it had crashed, though. It looked almost like it had been placed there. And just above it, nestled low among the clouds, were 2 or 3 more of these UFOs, silently watching from a distance. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Over the years, McPhee and others have continued to film unexplainable ships of every size and shape moving through the skies over Stirling. Ships that seem to blink in and out of existence. Remember that slow drift and dart in ways no aircraft can. Some are orbs, small and glowing, while others are vast, angular, and almost like cities adrift in the sky. These craft almost seem to perform, revealing themselves at just the right moment, like they're part of some larger choreography that no one yet understands. The blinking is tied to something, one of the theories, I know Tom DeLonge had talked about it before, Tom DeLonge of Blink-182, yes, is these things are apparently powered by some sort of electrogravitic engine. This thing can manipulate gravity. Rather than a source of propulsion, they're almost getting pulled. And there's never any sign of like a heat signature of like a propulsion system. It's because these things might be able to literally, what they're doing when they're blinking in and out is they're, you know, we've all seen the classic example. I think they do it in Interstellar where there's 2 dots on a sheet of paper, but if you fold it, suddenly those 2 dots are right there. It's kind of like that. Instead of going in a straight line, it's going do, do, do. It's like...
Yeah, they're folding space itself.
You're right. Exactly.
And that kind of technology would make sense as to why they're so easily able to traverse through air, water, basically anything.
Right. Exactly. So here's the question that inevitably rises. Why here? Why now? That question has haunted ufologists and witnesses alike. It's not just a few grainy photos anymore. As we know, this is literally miles of footage, multiple eyewitnesses, and decades of consistency. And yet, time and again, attempts to bring this story into the mainstream are met with strange and an almost willful silence. TV companies, drawn by the strange allure of the Falkirk Triangle, have come over the years with every intent of dismantling the narrative. They bring crews and consultants and scripts designed to laugh the story away, to reduce it to just local superstition or optical illusions. But their efforts fall short. Because the footage, honey, just like Shakira's hips, they don't lie. The stories are not going away. The sheer volume of what has been seen and captured and experienced simply cannot be brushed aside. And so we're left with a mystery that grows heavier the longer it lingers. If something is truly happening above Stirling and Bonnybridge and Gorebridge and wherever else, and it is, we know something's going on, we don't know what it is, then what exactly are we seeing, folks? Are we being observed? Are we even being extracted? Has there been an official settlement made by these beings? Or is this something that has always been here? Maybe even before us? A true reality that we are being shielded from or even are incapable of observing?
Yeah, that's an interesting idea that had occurred to me too. I mean, who's to say that we are the first really intelligent species to evolve on our planet? For all we know, they were around long before us.
Right.
And they've been so far past us in terms of their technology for so long that it's not been really that difficult for them to conceal themselves.
Right. It's, like we know, like there's certain, I don't know how it works, but like levels of light that we can't comprehend, but we know are there. Maybe we are literally incapable of observing them. Well, by 1998, old Bonnybridge had already earned its reputation as a magnet for the unexplained. But for a Mrs. Bonetti, a local resident with no ties to UFO communities or someone prone to sensational stories, this phenomenon wasn't just something out there in the hills. It was something that appeared like clockwork every Tuesday night, right above her neighbor's house. She didn't talk about it at first because why would she? People might laugh, roll their eyes. Regardless, though, it kept happening, week after week, without fail. And always the same shape. A small, black triangle, hovering silently in the sky just beyond her window, just above her neighbor's rooftop. And she would stand there with her ironing board each and every Thursday until one night, well, damn it, Miss Bonetti had had enough. She grabbed her camcorder. It was a clunky piece of 90s tech. She whips it out and she's filming this thing in the sky. There it was, clear as day. A triangle, motionless, hovering in the air without sound. When the footage got out, of course, it caused shockwaves. The story did not stay local either. It spread far and wide and soon reached the ears of one Dr. Stephen Greer, the American face of what has come to be known as exopolitics. A man whose name alone carries weight and, yes, some controversy. We've even reached out to him to be on the show here before. Hopefully someday we can speak to him. But yes, his name, it carries weight and controversy in the UFO world. Greer wasted no time and flew in on a private jet that he borrowed from an acquaintance. Greer left Scotland with the only known copy of this tape in hand, vanishing as quickly as he had arrived. It seemed for a time that Miss Bonetti's evidence had been quietly absorbed into the black hole of high-level secrecy, another thread pulled from the public narrative. But word got out, and under mounting pressure, the footage was eventually returned to its rightful owner. Still, the damage had been done. The message was clear, folks. Someone was watching, and not just from the sky, but from the ground, too. Watchers that were all too human. And they were very interested in what Mrs. Bonetti had captured. Some say the craft was not there visiting, but maybe even on assignment. The same way a country assigns a diplomat to handle relations with a foreign nation. Modern mystery and ancient history may very well meet beneath the mossy surface of Scotland itself. Mintorn TV, a respected production company with roots in both London and Glasgow, had posed a question that many have asked, but few have dared to pursue head-on. Have aliens invaded Scotland? And to that question, there appears to be a resounding yes. Not just in the past few decades, not even since the lights started swirling over Bonnybridge or the craft began crawling across the sterling skies, but for centuries, possibly longer. There is compelling reason to believe that non-human entities have been present here for a very long time, and likely still are. If they've been hiding, what if they haven't been doing so just in far-off galaxies or invisible dimensions, but right beneath our feet within the ancient and stable rock formations that have survived the passage of millennia? In particular, the Louisian Gneiss of northwestern Scotland, one of the oldest known surfaces on Earth, untouched by earthquakes, industry, or time, could well be home to subterranean networks and caverns where something inhuman dwells. And it isn't just UFO investigators saying this, folks. The idea of this phenomenon is woven into Scotland's oldest tales. Stories once told around the hearth fires and woven into lullabies meant to keep children calm or to warn them against danger. When you turn to the collected works of Reverend Robert Kirk in his 1691 book, Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies, or John Gregerson Campbell's Superstitions of the Highlands, published in 1900, or even Mary McLeod Banks's towering 4-volume 1937 collection, British Calendar Customs, you hear it plainly through the lens of folklore. Not greys, perhaps, not even orbs, but beings unknowable and inhuman, who appeared at night, took people without asking, and left something wrong behind. Consider this old Highland fairy lullaby, a melody passed down through generations. I left my baby lying here, lying here, lying here. I left my baby lying here to go gather blueberries. Hoven, hoven, gory-all go, gory-all go, gory-all go. I never found my baby, oh. I heard the curfew crying far, crying far, crying far. I heard the curlew crying far, but never heard my baby, oh. It almost reminds me of the beginning of The Witch, when the baby is taken. What we think of as abductions by greys today might have been abduction by fairies and witches and goblins of the past. This lullaby is more than a song, it's a warning, it's a memory, and it's a child gone missing, and a changeling left behind. A tale told to soothe a loss too devastating to endure. What today we'd call abduction by greys, they called the fae. The names change, the shapes change, but the behavior stays the same. Sort of like last week's episode in The Devil's Visit to Loftus Hall, and how eerily similar it is to this devil's supposed visit to the Hellfire Club in Dublin. Different circumstances, but the same format. So, if you ask whether Scotland has been visited, studied, or even inhabited by something from somewhere else, the answer doesn't just lie in Bonnybridge alone. It's in the rocks and in the songs and in the cultural folklore. What many people don't realize, what most have forgotten, is that the area we now call the Falkirk Triangle isn't just Scotland's modern epicenter for UFO sightings and skyborne strangeness. It's also steeped in a much older mystery hidden in plain sight within the country's fairy lore and abduction legends. Take, for instance, the old coal mining town of Blackridge in West Lothian, formerly known as Black Rig. It might look like just another post-industrial village today, but the land beneath it carries a far stranger name and purpose. According to folklorist Mary MacLeod Banks, Black Rig referred to a strip of medieval farmland, a rig that had been abandoned, or more chillingly set aside, not for the crown or the clergy, but for the fairies, or as some believed, for the devil himself. These strips of land were believed to be claimed by otherworldly forces, left untouched by mortal hands for fear of trespassing into a realm we were never meant to behold. The idea was clear: leave that land alone or pay the price. Centuries later, Blackridge found itself back in the spotlight, but now with modern abduction cases reported throughout the 1990s, where residents spoke of missing time, strange lights, and reoccurring dreams that felt more like memories than fiction. We talked about this, the idea that national parks might have been, some theorize that it was like an agreement struck between the government and extraterrestrials, like, hey, you can do your abducting, but it's got to be done within these designated areas. So this idea of literally land set aside for them is nothing new. It appears to have gone back millennia to medieval times to, people saying, oh no, that land is meant for the fairies or that land is meant for the devil. It's like we said, it's the same structure, just a different coat of paint. And the strangeness, of course, doesn't stop at the skies. Around the same time, a former GCHQ expert, a man who had worked at Menwith Hill, Britain's ultra-classified intelligence station, claimed to have seen something out of place in Blackridge. And this was not a ship or even a being, but something man-made, or at least something pretending to be. A highly exotic military communications aerial sticking out from one of the huts on the edge of town. Not public, but just standing silent, watching and possibly even receiving intel. It begs the question, was Blackridge just another coal town touched by the same wave of UFO fever, or was it something more? A place where ancient ground and alien presences blur, where the rig, both sacred and feared, is still being used, just not by us. For those brave enough to follow the trail of the Falkirk Triangle, you can walk the fields where lights once hovered, visit the places where people vanished and returned changed, or they never returned at all. You can pore over tales of faerie abductions and alien intrusions and try to decide which end of the spectrum things lie, because sometimes what we call folklore is just a forgotten report written in myth. Oh, folks, did you think it was going to stop at just talk of fairies?
Not a chance.
Did you think it was going to stop there? Baby, let's take this to the king. And I don't just mean the king of rock and roll, baby. I mean the Christian king of England. I'm talking about King Arthur. Now, the deeper you dig, the farther back the mystery reaches, of course. Until you're not just dealing with aliens, but with legends that have been carved into the bedrock of British identity itself. Because here, nestled within the murky edges of myth and memory, folklore tells of a final battle, not of greys and saucers, but of kings and traitors. It is said that one of the last stands of King Arthur, Britain's most mythologized Christian warrior, this took place not in the dreamy meadows of Avalon or the shadowy hills of Wales, but right there in a small village near modern-day Falkirk called Camelon. Notice that name and its similarities to Camelot. The year was around 540 AD. According to some interpretations of the old chronicles, this was where Arthur met his end, cut down by pagan forces. Or more precisely, by the hand of Mordred, his own blood. A traitor, a bastard son, and in some versions, a creature of darkness wrapped in flesh. The location is key. Camelon wasn't just chosen by accident. This was a place of crossroads. We all know about crossroads, baby. Of both the spiritual, military warfare, and perhaps even cosmic influence. If you believe the old stories, then it was here that the veil between worlds was thinnest. And it was where the great Christian king of myth faced forces that may have been more than just mortal men. Mordred is often depicted as a human adversary, but in some variants of the lore, his origins are murky, even unnatural. A shadow child, an abomination. The idea that Arthur fell not just to betrayal, but to something inhuman, something birthed of woman, but corrupted by the otherworldly. This has haunted the margins of the tale for centuries. And what do we find in Camelon today? It's a landscape riddled with burial mounds, ancient standing stones, and modern reports of UFOs and spectral lights, as if something never stopped haunting the battlefields. What if the story of Arthur's fall isn't just a tale of betrayal, but one of incursion as well? And what if the Falkirk Triangle had always been a place of conflict, a place where humanity meets the other, and not always on equal terms? If you're looking for something to anchor the myth of the Falkirk Triangle into the bones of history, well, look no further than an old and often overlooked volume known as the Book of Glasgow Cathedral. In it lies a quote drawn from the writings of the medieval historian Nennius, dated to around 800 AD. This excerpt suggests something profound and perhaps long forgotten. According to Nennius, it was in central Scotland where King Arthur fought his final battles. Not in Cornwall, not in Wales, where the location is usually attributed. I was talking to my father last night, because we like to, read and stuff, we're big readers. Of course, you kind of have to be if you're going to do a show like Creep Street. You kind of got to be a big reader. But we were saying, I don't think I remember reading some of King Arthur when I was little in school, but I'm sure they were versions that were abridged for kids, you know what I mean? Because I looked it up, because of course, the first mention of King Arthur, it's something like 900 AD. But then of course, time goes on and stories are made. I think the ones we're taught in school were written in the 1800s. They were more I think they were written in Victorian times. I can't remember the guy's name. It's a person's name it's a well-known author who kind of made them household names, essentially, at least for people outside of the UK. I'm sure for the UK they'd been around a long time, but kind of made them household names outside of the UK, because now everyone at least has heard of King Arthur. But what most people don't know is that he might actually have existed. Maybe all the fantastic tales about him didn't happen, that he was just a king that, maybe had, because back then, there were fiefdoms and little kingdoms all over the place, people, there's kings have come and gone and stuff like that. And it's, so who knows, it could be a real man who was lost into time, and it's just the stories about him weren't necessarily real, or maybe it's all real, who knows? More specifically, though, he is said to have fallen at Camelon, a town now nestled between Bonnybridge and Falkirk, squarely within what we now call the Falkirk Triangle. And let that sink in, because if it's true, that would mean that this patch of seemingly quiet countryside that is now dotted with UFO sightings, phantom hums, and ghostly lights, that it was once the site of Britain's most legendary last stand. Oh, but there's more. Because according to the lore, Arthur didn't just die and fade into the mist. He wasn't spirited off to Avalon, nor buried in some lost chapel. It's said that the victorious forces, presumably those of Mordred, the traitor, also called the Shadow Son, they are said to have constructed a massive beehive-shaped stone structure over the site of his death. A mound or marker, perhaps even a tomb, to seal something within. Beehive-shaped stone chambers were not uncommon in ancient ritual construction, as they were often linked to burial, protection, or even containment. These weren't just graves, they were architectural spells designed to lock something away. So the question rises, if true, what exactly did they bury at Camelon? Was it Arthur, the famous king of legend? A relic of some kind, or perhaps it was something that shouldn't have survived the battle? And as the Falkirk Triangle continues to flare with sightings and anomalies, there's no denying there is a strange power that defies time and description there. You have to wonder if that old beehive mound still hums beneath the soil, and not just with history. Well, what many don't realize, and what many refuse to even entertain, is that the strange mound not only marks the death of King Arthur at Camelon, but something far more impactful than the legend of King Arthur already is. According to some interpretations, it may have been built deliberately not only to honor the fallen king, but to echo a prophecy far older and more cryptic than the Arthurian legend itself. Tied to biblical scripture, the structure has long been associated with a riddle spoken by Samson in the book of Judges 14:14. Here is the verse from the King James Version. And he said unto them, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness, and they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. On its surface, it's a poetic paradox, but when applied to the story of Arthur and Mordred, it takes on a much darker meaning. Some scholars have paraphrased it as, out of the strong, meaning the Christian, but dead Arthurian line of David, comes forth the sweet honey of the industrious worker bees from the competing line of Dan. In this reading, Arthur represents the spiritual strength and sacred bloodline believed to descend from the house of David. Mordred, the usurper, often associated with betrayal and shadow, is said to reflect the line of Dan, a lineage with a far more complicated reputation. Over the centuries, this idea has evolved in what is now called the Moravian conspiracy, a theory that proposes the intermingling of these two ancient houses, the House of David and the House of Dan, in a secret bloodline that shaped the political and spiritual histories of Europe from behind the scenes. The suggestion is that what happened at Camelon wasn't just the fall of a king, but a symbolic passing of power, not a clean break, but an entanglement, not a death, but a sort of mutation of legacy. Now, the so-called Moravian conspiracy claims that the earliest kings of medieval France, the Moravians, weren't just regular royals, but they descended from a holy lineage, a bloodline stretching all the way back to Jesus Christ and Mary Magdalene themselves. If true, that would mean that a secret war between the sacred and the serpent blood has raged for centuries, hidden beneath coats of arms, cathedral stones, and the forgotten corners of history. Some say the real Holy Grail was never a chalice, but it was the blood flowing through chosen veins, guarded across millennia by a secret order who knew the terrible power it carried. And in places like Camelon and Bonnybridge, some wonder if the echoes of that ancient struggle still flicker in the skies above and churn in the soil below. Maybe the mystery isn't just about what we're seeing, maybe it's about what's remembering us. Some even say that the Antichrist will be a descendant of the House of Dan. Now, FYI, some folks who get really into this, it can often be used as an anti-Semitic or anti-Catholic propaganda. I just wanted to put that out there. Some people with the wrong intentions grab hold of these legends and make them ugly. For example, the House of David, the House of Dan, they're talking about the tribes of Israel. One tribe of Dan was said to be, so it kind of, you can see where it gets a little like, ooh, okay, if they're wrong, how some douchebags can take that and run with it and make it, turn it into some sort of anti-Semitic, or anti-Catholic ideology. So just wanted to put that out there, that sometimes people can take that and make it yucky. But it was kind of made famous, though, this idea, this Moravian conspiracy, in Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code. So that was kind of where it was. And of course they add, they add stuff in there for more, dramatize it and whatnot. But that's kind of where it kind of became, a lot of people kind of learned about it for the first time was in that novel. Because I can remember when I was a kid, That novel was huge. It was everywhere.
It was a cultural sensation.
It really was. I mean, it was like almost to like, now it didn't hang on like Harry Potter did because that had so much media attached to it. But like that book was just, now I think like the sequels never made much of a splash the way like Harry Potter did. But that first book, people just went crazy for it. And so the location where Arthur is said to have fallen becomes something more than just a battlefield. It becomes a monument coated in stone, layered in secrecy, and rooted in a landscape that has always carried a strange weight. Because today, this very region of the Falkirk Triangle is known for its lights in the sky, its stories of abduction, and its unshakable sense that something unseen is lurking, not above, but below. Whether it's through biblical riddles, medieval myth, or modern encounters, this patch of Scotland continues to pull at the veil. Now, as we already know, it's said that the fall of King Arthur at Camelon, there was this great stone hive-like structure that was raised over the site of his demise. Now, whether this was meant to honor him or seal something away, it still stood as a monument to a turning point, a shift in lineage, in prophecy, and in the balance of power. That structure is no longer standing today like so many ancient things. It was gradually picked apart and assimilated stone by stone into the foundations of local buildings and roads and absorbed quietly into the infrastructure of daily life. But remnants remain. And from the modern marvel known as the Falkirk Wheel, a stunning piece of contemporary engineering that links the Forth, the Clyde, and the Union Canal system, you can still look out across the land where legend says Arthur fell. It's a view that binds the past and the present in a single glance. Now, you got to think, if you were to take stone like from this thing, now granted, maybe people who did it didn't even realize what they were taking it from, but like, you got to now that would be a way for like a haunting to spread, you would think. Like if you have like a sacred memorial and people each took like a piece, it's almost like maybe some of these things are wanting the pieces back. That could be a thing too. It's like things like where are, like almost looking for the land, looking for the, and maybe it's not even the stones, but just metaphorically, like it's like looking for certain pieces. And, I don't know my Arthurian legends. I would really love to read more. I mean, it's such a fascinating, there's such beautiful stories. I can remember the prose sounding so beautiful and like, of course, the story, Merlin and Guinevere and Excalibur and the Knights of the Round Table. It's such beautiful folklore. I really want to learn more about it. So I don't come at me if it's, if you know for a fact it wasn't Camelon. I'm just, sharing what the sources say. But apparently in some tellings, that is where he died, as opposed to, I guess there's a few different versions. Some say it was Cornwall, England. Some say it was in Wales, so it's, it's kind of it's all about, of course. He's a hot shot. Everyone wants a piece of King A, you know what I'm saying?
Everyone wants to claim him.
That's right. Well, let's talk about kelpies, because I think we've talked about them before when we've talked about, we never did a dedicated episode on them, but I think they've come up a few times in stories. Not far from the storied grounds of Camelon stands one of Scotland's most striking modern monuments, the kelpies. Towering into the sky like twin titans, these massive rearing horse heads are sculpted from gleaming steel and rooted deep into the earth, casting long shadows across the nearby canal and fields. Well, on the surface, these kelpies honor the Shire horses of the 19th century, powerful, tireless beasts that hauled barges and helped build the industrial backbone of the nation. They are monuments to strength and endurance and to the spirit and work ethic etched into Scotland's past. But the name tells another story. Because before they were celebrated, kelpies were often feared in folklore. In the old Highland tales, these were not gentle workhorses, right? These weren't the wild horses that the Rolling Stones sang about. This is something a little different. They were shape-shifting water spirits, often taking the form of beautiful black horses. They would lure travelers to climb onto their backs, only to drag them screaming into the depths of the sea to be drowned. These were not beasts of burden, but creatures of deception and abduction and death. On certain nights, if you catch them at just the right time in the soft blue glow of the field lights, it's hard not to think of that older version of the mythical creature. Because I can remember, I think there's like tales, because you know how like there's almost like, they're not a Grimm's fairy tale, but kind of like in that vein, but like kids who were naughty, who went out at night, they would see these horses and they'd be like, horsey, and they'd get on, and Black Beauty would carry them into the damn sea and drown them. Motorists driving home along M9 often catch them outside the corner of their eye, these massive silver statues that rise kind of unexpectedly from the earth. If you didn't know they were there, they might take you off guard a little bit. And for a brief moment, the ancient and the modern seem to collapse into one. What was meant to be a tribute becomes a warning. Yes, they're beautiful, of course, awe-inspiring even, but they're also a reminder that even our monuments can carry ghosts, that even art can become a summoning. And in a place like the Falkirk Triangle, it's hard to look at the Kelpies and not wonder, what if the Kelpies of myth still roam the lands? Long before UFOs patrolled the skies over Bonnybridge and long before shimmering craft rose from the fields of Gorebridge, this part of Scotland was already marked, literally, with a line meant to keep something out, or perhaps to keep something in. Because around 150 AD, the Romans constructed a fortified turf wall across the narrowest part of central Scotland. It was called the Antonine Wall, and it stretched from Bo'ness on the Firth of Forth to Old Kilpatrick on the River Clyde. The Firth of Forth, now that is a name.
Yeah, Firth of Forth.
That is a name. I'm Frank from the Firth of Forth.
Happy 4th of July on the Firth of Forth.
Happy 4th of July on the Firth of Forth. Of course, we don't celebrate the 4th of July, but we just live on the Firth of Forth. The transatlantic. It's the 1930s, see? Where did those Kelpies take all the dames? Unlike Hadrian's Wall farther south, this northern boundary cut directly through the heart of that, let's say it together, folks, the Falkirk Triangle. The Falkirk Triangle and the Firth of Forth. And though much of it has been weathered with time, large segments can actually still be seen, particularly near Falkirk and Bo'ness, where the land still remembers the tread of the Roman legions. But as centuries passed and the wall persisted into the Middle Ages, it picked up another name, a more ominous name. Locals began calling it Grimes Dyke. At first glance, this was thought to reference Clan Graham, descended from the earlier Grahams, a warrior family with roots in the same soil. But dig a little deeper, and you'll find a darker connotation. In certain parts of Scotland, Graham was used as a nickname for the devil, which means that Graham's Dyke was known not just as a wall, but as the Devil's Dyke. And that changes everything. This was no longer just a Roman fortification. It had become a spiritual boundary, something like a haunted line etched across the land. The Romans may have built it to hold back the fierce and unconquered Caledonian tribes, but over time, the folklore suggests that it might have been built as a line of containment, to keep something in, a dividing line between realms. While further north in the highlands and beyond the reach of Rome, other strange beliefs flourished. Among many of the northern tribes, there was a quiet reverence, sometimes even deification, of the serpent, a symbol often associated with hidden knowledge, cyclical power, and at times with spiritual warfare. The Scots have never shied away from the mystical. In fact, they've seemed to lean into it, even when it hurts. But one thing remains constant. The Romans never truly conquered Scotland. The land north of the Antonine Wall remained wild, baby, defiant and unclaimed, like a bachelor who refuses to settle down. Perhaps it wasn't only the people who resisted conquest. Perhaps it was the land itself, because here, on this blood-soaked, star-watched stretch of Scotland, it's not just darkness at work, baby. There's other forces. Good ones, too, quietly moving in opposition, hidden but still present. as old as the stones themselves. And they, too, are watching in the skies. Among the wild beauty and shadowed edges of early medieval Scotland, a peculiar kind of holiness emerged. The Celtic saints, born of a land steeped in mystery and resistance, seemed less like the gentle shepherds of continental Christendom and more like seers, mystics who moved through visions and skyborne signs, and whose miracles didn't just feel holy, but otherworldly. One of the most extraordinary among them was Cuthbert, born around 635 AD near what would one day become Melrose Abbey.
It's like a cross between Melrose Place and Downton Abbey.
I mean, sexy singles, dating, courting, in the case of Downton Abbey. Even in childhood, Cuthbert's life seemed touched by high strangeness. Stories would tell of him witnessing angelic lights, visions of souls, and other celestial events, and not just in his dreams, but in the open air, in the vast Scottish sky that so many today say still burns with things not of this earth. Cuthbert's visions were not quiet things either. They moved him, baby. They called for him. And eventually, they drew him south to Lindisfarne, the holy island at the edge of Northumbria, where he would rise to become prior, and later bishop of the great priory there. But even in his moments of recognition and authority, Cuthbert resisted the noise of the world. He always preferred the life of a hermit. He wanted solitude. He wanted the wild coastlines and windswept islands. He wanted the silence that brought him closer to whatever forces had stirred above him since his youth. To the faithful, his visions were signs of God's grace. To the curious, they may hint at something broader, something that touches both divinity and paranormal phenomenon. And in the Falkirk Triangle, where modern sightings of lights and beings and strange presences continue to surface, Cuthbert's stories now read like early chapters of the same unfolding narrative. Perhaps the saints weren't just holy. Perhaps they were chosen. I'm sure some thought that too. I think a lot of them think that today. Or perhaps they simply saw what others couldn't. Long before anyone spoke of trails in the sky or questioned the strange streaks that linger overhead, there was another kind of aerial spectacle, and one not wrought by machines or chemical drift, but by something far more mysterious, perhaps even divine. In the year 823 AD, just southeast of what is now Edinburgh, the Scots stood on the verge of battle at Athelstan Ford. Whew, that's a mouthful. Athelstan Ford. Their odds were uncertain. Their spirits stretched thin. But as they gathered and they prayed, it appeared to them. A white cross, brilliant and unmistakable, suddenly emblazoned itself across an otherwise clear blue sky. And this was no cloud. This was no trick of the light. This was a dang symbol, an irrefutable sign. And it arrived not at random, but after prayer, as though in answer. To those who stood below it, the meaning was immediate and undeniable. This was a sign that St. Andrew, the apostle and martyr, had come to guide them, that their cause would be victorious, that this saint would walk beside them in battle and beyond, and indeed they did win. From that moment forward, the image in the sky became more than a moment, it became a legacy. The Saltire, or St. Andrew's Cross, would become the national flag of Scotland, a simple white X against a sky blue field. Its roots not in design, but in a vision seen, recorded, and remembered for over 1,000 years. Now, to the faithful, this was a miracle, and to those maybe more curious, perhaps the earliest known chemtrails, maybe. A streak of atmospheric mystery, not caused by aircraft, but by something that answers when called. And chemtrails, of course, we briefly mentioned, we haven't done an episode on that. It's obviously conspiracy theory that our governments or whatever, those plane trails in the sky that maybe they're releasing certain chemicals down on us for unknown reasons. I'm gonna start stocking up. I'm gonna build a trench. I'm gonna build a little fallout shelter. They're not gonna take me! But we'll have to do an episode on that, because that's a fun one. And in a region where lights in the sky have long been woven into the very fabric of the land, from UFOs to fairy fire to ancient angelic signs, it feels less like a singular event and more like another detail in this same story that the heavens have been telling us all along. In Scotland, you see, the skies speak, and sometimes it even writes in light and miracles. Just north of Falkirk and south of Stirling, nestled right within that ancient corridor, lies one of Scotland's most storied battlefields, Bannockburn. It was here in 1314 AD that the Scots under Robert the Bruce faced down overwhelming English forces in a fight for sovereignty that would define a nation. But it wasn't just warriors with steel on the field that day, because according to legend, something else arrived to stand with the Scots. Something unseen by most, but felt by all. The relics of St. Filian. Nathan Filian.
Good actor.
Good actor. Known as one of Scotland's more mysterious holy figures, St. Filian lived centuries earlier and of course was renowned for his visions, his apparent ability to heal, and his strange connection to divine light. But it wasn't just his presence that lingered after death, it was his relics, baby. His gold, his bling, his flash. He was said to be infused with supernatural power. And on that day at Bannockburn, as the tide of battle swelled and the future of Scotland hung in by a very thread, something miraculous happened. Witnesses claimed that the glowing relics of St. Filian suddenly materialized, not in a church or in a shrine, but they literally came up from the battlefield itself, out of the ground. Neither carried by priests or planted by hand, they appeared shining and otherworldly, but unmistakably real. The soldiers who saw them, well, dang it, they knew it was a sign. Not just one of faith, but of the favor of their Lord. An irrefutable sign of blessing and protection, and that God was on their side. And so the Scots surged forward with a fury and a clarity that turned the tide, driving back the invaders and securing a victory that would echo through the centuries. Some say it was a miracle. Others might even call it a mass vision, or even a case of sacred high strangeness. An event where spiritual power and the paranormal phenomenon of the land blurred together in a way that cannot be unraveled unless experienced firsthand. One thing is certain, though. It happened here, baby. Right there in Bannockburn, in a region already brimming with ancient energy. To the uninitiated, the Triangle may seem like just another hot spot for lights in the sky, which is already interesting enough. But those who come looking with older maps, those who know to look for patterns, for symbols, for stories carved in the earth, they find themselves pulled into something far bigger than just flashing orbs and distant lights. People still journey from all over the world, chasing a trail that began in myth and was reignited by fiction, of course, thanks in part to Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and of course many other kinds of books. From the intricate stonework of Rosalind Chapel to the whispering groves of Stirling, seekers come to connect the dots between places rumored to hold sacred secrets and maybe even the Holy Grail itself, baby. On one of the more curious landmarks in this modern-day pilgrimage is a knoll known as Ladies' Rock. That's right. Tucked away within a cemetery just south of Stirling Castle. On the surface, it's quiet and often overlooked as just another mound among many. But among the initiated, it's said to be a potential hiding site for objects of immense spiritual power. Relics, codes, possibly even the Grail. And who watched over these relics? The task, some say, fell to the Stella Templum, or the Scottish Star Temple, a secretive group believed to have once curated the protected artifacts too sacred or even too dangerous for the public eye. Their insignia is telling. The Argent Templar 8-pointed Maltese cross emblazoned on a dark blue field. To the unknowing, it's just a symbol. But to those in the know, the silver and blue denote a spiritual calling, a lineage of guardianship, that may stretch back to the Templars or the Moravians or possibly something older still. But let's end on a positive note here. If it weren't enough to raise eyebrows and pulses alike already, there's one more nickname for this place. One that doesn't speak of saints or space flight, but of something far more earthly. The Golden Circle. Because statistically speaking, folks, the region that makes up the Falkirk Triangle has produced an unusually high number of national lottery winners. Some call it luck, baby. Some call it luck. It's that ladies rock luck, you know. Putting it all on black. Let's do it. But for locals living in the area, it starts to feel like a pattern. And Gage, you were saying the other day when we were talking about jazz, you know, especially freeform jazz, improvised jazz, there's something that, like, when you're listening to it, you might not, like, sometimes the time signatures are so bizarre, but yet it should sound like a cacophony, but it doesn't sound like just noise. There's something about it that clicks. And you said it's in context.
Yes, yeah, it's in context, and your mind kind of unconsciously processes it.
Yes. And it's, in a weird way, I think that applies to this, you know? Like we said, whenever we're doing an episode of Creep Street, it can be something entirely unrelated. We're doing something on a mysterious disappearance, but it'll like somehow have a connection to something we covered a haunting like 80 episodes ago. And we don't pretend to know what that means or if it means anything, but our minds notice the patterns. We notice the symbols. And I think that sort of applies here. It feels like a pattern, like something baked into the land itself. Like the people drawn here are meant to be marked. So whatever you're chasing, whether it's UFOs, sacred relics, or just a bit of supernatural fortune, one thing's clear. There's something very strange about that region of Scotland known as the Falkirk Triangle. And the deeper you look, the more it seems that some force, be it ancient, alien, or divine, is rewarding those who listen. Well, folks, that is the story of Scotland's Falkirk Triangle. When I started researching this, I mean, God, it takes us from government cover-ups and possible UFO technology to dang King Arthur to kelpies and fairies and all the changelings. Like a lot of what the context, I think that it's even, you know, like the notes said, it's the names change, the look changes, but the pattern is the same. It even specifically, I saw that when I was researching, I saw that in the article, and I remembered our chat about jazz, about how the mind notices, it recognizes a pattern, even if it doesn't understand it, even if it can't explain it, it still knows when if you're listening to just freeform jazz to just compared to like just noise, like your brain knows the difference. Your brain can tell. And, you know, and I'm not saying freeform jazz sounds like noise, because I've been really getting into some John Coltrane lately, been listening to A Love Supreme. I was telling Gage that, because Gage is more of an aficionado when it comes to jazz than I am. I'm kind of newly getting into it. But no, and I think that pattern, it applies here. What was once called fairies, witches, you know, maybe that is our government cover-ups, our secret societies, our UFO, you know what I mean? Those are what we fear. Are we being, well, I mean, we know we're being spied on by our devices, but I mean, like, the forces of evil look different, but they're still there. Before it was fairies, witches and stuff. Today sometimes it's even we think of each other depending on our beliefs or something that's the source of evil, or this is the source, you know, but it's a pattern that remains the same. It's so fascinating to think about that, to think of like Arthur on the battlefield, and then like nearby is like some sort of craft, you know, like, because we covered in a Patreon episode once, it was a medieval UFO sighting. It was a blazing ball of fire that this whole village saw because they were at mass, and this loud noise got everyone to come running outside the church, and they saw what they claimed was this huge, massive fireball rise out of the lake and up into the sky and like shoot away, and they could feel the heat off of it. It was almost like a sun in a way, but like much smaller, you know. And it's like they all saw that. Now to them, obviously, they thought that was either a sign from God or the sign of a devil or
something, whereas we would say UFO, someone from another world or from beneath our feet, or secretive government technology or something. Like the boogeyman's face changes, but there's always a boogeyman, which means there probably is a boogeyman. We just don't know what it looks like, or it changes shape, it changes form, kind of like what we said with the Loftus Hall story. The fact that that story is essentially, granted different context, but the frame of that encounter is almost identical to the one at the Dublin Hellfire Club, means that it probably did happen somewhere. Maybe it didn't happen at this place or that place, but it got attributed to these places. It's a framework of a story, meaning it must have come from somewhere.
And, you just have so many different accounts, but they all are similar in their own ways and all tied to the same thing or place or whatnot. I mean, we don't know a definitive explanation, but clearly there's something going on that ties them all together.
Yeah, it's just so fun to think about. It's just fun to, it's good to let your mind, and it doesn't mean you have to believe or something, but I think it's healthy to let your mind fantasize fantastic things. It's good. I think it's like exercise, but for your brain. I think it's, as much as it's good to know your legitimate, not that any of this I'm saying is illegitimate, but as good as it is to know your legitimate history, current events, or even just when it comes to things like math, science, English, reading, all that stuff, I think it's good to let your mind explore fun ideas, even if they're wacky. It's fun and it's good. I think it's a good exercise for the brain. But
definitely, I think it speaks to a desire for understanding, which can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Gage. I got a list of names I wouldn't mind riding off into the hills of Scotland with to do battle.
Oh yeah? Who's that?
The names of our top-tier Patreon subscribers.
Of course, the Dream James Watkins, the Finnish Face via Lundqvist, the Madman Marcus Hall, the Tenacious Teresa Hackworth, the Heartbreak Kid Chris Hackworth, the Oh-So-Suave Sean Richardson, the Notorious Nicholas Barker, the Terrifying Taylor Lashmet, the Count of Cool Cameron Corliss, the Archduke of Attitude Adam Archer, the Sinister Sam Kiker, the Nightmare of New Zealand Noeline Vivilli, the Loathsome Johnny Love, the Carnivorous Kevin Bogey, the Killer Stud Carl Staub, the Firestarter Heather Carter, the Conqueror Christopher Damian Damaris, the Awfully Awesome Annie, the Murderous Maggie Leach, the Serve Sexy Sam Hackworth, the Evil Elizabeth Riley, Lauren Hellfire Hernandez Lopez, the Maniacal Laura Maynard, the Vicious Karen Van Buren, the Arch Nemesis Aaron Bird, the Sadistic Sergio Castillo, the Rapscallion Ryan Crum, the Beast Benjamin Huang, the Devilish Chris Doucette, the Psycho Sam, the Electric Emily Zhang, the Ghoulish Gert Hankum, the Renegade Corey Ramos, the Crazed Carlos, the Antagonist Andrew Park, the Monstrous Michaela Schur, the Witchy Wonder J.P. Weimer, the Freaky Ben Forsyth, the Barbaric Andrew Barry, the Mysterious Marcella, the Hellacious Cale Hoffman, and Pugblorb, the Poltergeist. Oh, folks, that's right. If you want to be just like that blessed group of saints, come to patreon.com/Creep Street Podcast for all sorts of goodies. Folks, once again, we thank you so much for hanging with us. Gage, do you have any music or anything coming out soon? What you working on?
I'm working on an album. I'm not sure when that's coming out, but if you're curious, subscribe to Vaporverse on YouTube, and so you don't miss out.
Absolutely. Do you know, is there like, can you feel a theme coming on?
Oh, yeah. This is a definitely classic Vaporwave album. It's going to sound very 80s. Very 80s.
Nice.
So if that's your bag, look out for that.
That's right, folks. Go check out Vaporverse on YouTube. It's just one word, Vaporverse. And it's also always in the links on the YouTube version of the episode and regular podcast links on like Spotify and Apple and stuff. So go check that out. Well, folks, from the bottom of our hearts here on Creep Street, we love you and we thank you. Citizens of the Milky Way, my name is Dylan Hackworth.
And I'm Gage Hurley.
Good night and goodbye.